Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome to the Tongue Tied for the Love of Languages podcast. I'm Tyler, the armchair linguist. I'm really happy that you're here if you're listening to this. I don't know how many people will listen to this. Probably my mom at the very least. Hi, Mom. With this podcast, I wanted to do a lot of things. I have some plans for this podcast. Probably the biggest plans that I have is I want to interview linguists, because in the language learning community, I've found that linguists kind of have an interesting place. They're either kind of put on a pedestal and revered, or they're seen as elitists who get down on lowly little casual language learners like myself. My own interactions with linguists online has been largely positive, but I also see what other people post about them on Twitter and things like that. But the first thing that we're going to talk about, I kind of wanted to start the podcast out as kind of talking to someone who's just getting into language learning, or maybe someone who is thinking about learning a language, and kind of also to talk to myself as a brand new language learner. So today I think we're going to talk about why should you learn a new language, and these are just my thoughts, my opinions. I'm not a linguist, and I'm not anybody who has authority. I just really love learning languages, and I'm going to share my thoughts and opinions with you. So let's get started. So before we get into talking about why we should learn languages, I just wanted to give a little introduction for myself about maybe what I'm all about, and my experience with learning languages. So, like I said, I'm not a linguist. I'm just a language enthusiast. I live in the United States, and so my first language, my native language, is English. And although I had a couple stints of trying to learn languages, starting in high school, I tried to take French in high school, and then in my early 20s, I learned a little bit of Portuguese, and that was really the first time that I thought that maybe I could learn another language. But really, I didn't really start actively learning foreign languages until I was 29 or so, and I learned French. And now I speak French conversationally. I can speak enough French to hold a conversation with a patient native speaker. Mais je ne pense pas que je parle français très bien. But I get better every day, and I'm able to be understood by French speakers, and I can understand them. So I'm hoping one day to have some certifications in French, and maybe become a French teacher in high school or something. Excuse me, but I still have to get through college and things like that. That's another big thing about me. I never finished college. It's a big regret for me, but I'm actually starting to go back to college on Monday, so that's exciting. It's May of 2020, and I start classes on June 1st. And now my goal in college is to get a degree in either linguistics or education, some mix of those two, and become a foreign language teacher. So now, I have French. and that's great. Right now, I'm studying Norwegian, which I love. Norwegian is super intuitive compared to French. It's relative to it's relevant rather. It's relevant to my ancestry. My dad's side of the family comes from Norway, and so and also I wanted to learn Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. So that's why I'm learning Norwegian, and I've dabbled a little bit in Icelandic, which is a closer language to Old Norse, and I really love Icelandic. And I don't know, Icelandic has been nagging at my brain for a little while here, so I might end up going back to Icelandic before too long. But so that's about me and what I'm doing. So let's talk now about why should you learn another language. If you're here and you are not sure, like maybe you've thought about learning another language, or maybe you took a little bit of Spanish in high school. I mean, obviously, if you're here listening to a language learning podcast, you know that I'm going to tell you, do it, learn another language. But why should you do that? I mean, I can't give you data. There is data and research out there that says that learning another language is really good for your brain. It holds back Alzheimer's and things like that. But I'm not a doctor and I'm not a linguist, and so I'm not going to bombard you with that research. You can find it online. I'm going to tell you about my experience. What has language learning done for me? I think the biggest thing is it has created relationships, and it's created bonds between people. One of my best friends in the whole world is my language learning buddy from France. I met her on Conversation Exchange. I was looking for a native French speaker to practice my French with, and she has helped me a lot. And she also became a really close friend. She flew to the United States for the first time a couple days after, actually the day after my daughter was born. So her first trip to the United States was spent mostly in the hospital with my wife and I and our brand new baby girl. And then a couple years later, she came back, and we did what we were really planning to do. We went to Disney, and we gave her kind of the American experience here in Florida. And then she came back just this last year over Christmas and spent a whole month with us, and it was just amazing. She's a very dear friend. And if I hadn't learned French, if I hadn't been learning French, that relationship would have never happened. And so, just like the purpose of language is to communicate and to create bonds with other people, whether those bonds are friendly or romantic or of a business nature. Your language is a tool for you to make those bonds and to maintain them. And learning a foreign language can open up doors to communicating with people all over the world. I mean, just with French, you can talk to people from France, you can talk to people from Quebec, you can talk to people from all over Africa. There are French-speaking people all over Africa. There are French-speaking people in Asia. There's just so much. Like, it's just pretty incredible. A couple months ago, I was at a local elementary school that my wife works at was holding an international Theyre to kind of, encourage the kids to be inquisitive about geography and about world cultures. And so we were in charge of a couple tables. My wife was doing the table about Australia, yeah, and I was doing the table about France. And through that night, I mean, I live in a pretty small town. I mean, it's not tiny. I've lived in smaller towns, but I live in Gainesville, Florida, probably about 100,000 people, maybe more. Um, and so there's not, this isn't New York City, this isn't Philadelphia, but even just in this small town, when I was running the French table at this international fair, I spoke French to people from all kinds of different places. Europe, Canada, Africa. I spoke more French that night than I had since my friend Christelle was here, and it was amazing. And we all understood one another, and it was a very uplifting experience for everybody. There was this guy. Um, he was his kids were he and his wife were running one of the other tables from one of the African countries, and he, like, his kids had come through, and I had some like crepes and candy and stuff that I was giving out to the kids, and so they came through and had their crepes, and I said bonjour to them, and they kind of were like, oh, whatever, give me some food, and and after they came through, a couple minutes later, their dad brought them back. Like, he had them both kind of by the scruff of their necks, and he said to them in French, go talk to him. And so they kind of shyly came up and said bonjour, and we were talking, and I was talking to them in French, and the dad stood back and watched his kids speak French to me, and he was so happy. He had this huge smile on his face, and so that's another thing that languages can do by learning them, is they improve people's lives. There's this fear in the United States that that if you don't speak a language perfectly, people that speak that language are going to be upset with you, because that's how we ourselves are about English in a lot of cases. America is still very much a melting pot. And even in the smallest town, you can find people that are not native English speakers. And it's been my experience that a lot of times those people suffer quite a bit of criticism because they don't speak English very well. And so because we tend to be like that, we get down on people who can't speak English very well. We turn around and reflect that onto ourselves with other people. But the reality is, if you go to France and you speak enough French to be polite, you're going to be fine. Like, when I went to Paris in 2015, I could speak enough French to get my needs met. I could ask for the toilet. I could navigate. I could, order food. I could be polite. And I found that, like, the people in Paris were very patient with me and very kind. I didn't get any sense of that kind of stereotypical rude Parisian thing going on. But that's because I made an attempt. I attempted to speak the language, and I was polite, and even if after I spoke French they spoke to me back in English, there was no rudeness in their body language or their tone of voice. There was no contempt because I didn't speak French perfectly. And with Norwegian, when I have contacted people about, like, having a little language exchange in Norwegian, they're all really happy and surprised that I'm learning Norwegian at all. Like, why are you learning Norwegian? Nobody learns Norwegian. And I've heard from others that, like, countries in Asia, like, if you if you go down, say you study a little bit of Mandarin, and you can go down and you speak enough Mandarin, even to just say, hi, how are you doing, and be polite. Like, what people have told me is that those people are going to be so happy and grateful that you are learning their language, that it'll just make their day. And from my own experience, so one time I went to volunteer at this retirement home. I don't really remember where this was, whether it was in Alaska, where I grew up, or whether it was in Idaho. I've been a lot of different places, so sometimes it's hard to think about where things were, but I think it was in Idaho. But um, so I went to volunteer at this retirement community, and there was this old woman there. She was probably 97 or 98, and she didn't speak any English really. She could understand some English, but she was Russian. And the people who worked at the retirement home told me that she has had a lot of struggles because she's just not happy. She's not able to speak to anybody because she doesn't speak English, and she's just really unhappy, and kind of had a reputation for being unkind. And so we, did these activities and read, stories and listened to stories, and we did some dancing with the old people, and it was a lot of fun. But when we were about to leave, I went over to this woman who was from Russia, and I knelt down beside her. She was in a wheelchair. I knelt down beside her, and I told her "Das Vidanya," um, which is really the only Russian that I know. But the change that came over her just because I had said "Das Vidanya" was phenomenal. Like, her face lit up. She smiled at me. She said thank you. Like, her eyes were alight with happiness, and that's the effect that learning another language can have on people around you and on yourself. There's a thrill with speaking a foreign language that is kind of like, a similar kind of thrill to, jumping off of a moving car in an action movie. Not that I've ever done that, but when you open your mouth and speak a language that's not your native language, there's a real chance that you're going to fall on your face and say something stupid or be misunderstood, or and that's part of it. That's part of learning a language. But um, but then when you open your mouth and you speak the language, even if it's not perfect, you can see that the person understands you, and that knowledge that you've been understood is the thrill. And likewise, if you hear your language and you understand what someone said to you in your target language, that's a thrill as well. It's amazing. It's addicting. Um, and we'll talk more about speaking foreign languages later. But so the first reason I would say learn a foreign language is because it'll improve your life and it'll improve the lives of people around you. If you run into somebody who speaks your target language, they're in the United States. They're not expecting to hear their language. Really, even with Spanish speakers, there are communities of Spanish speakers, and there are restaurants where you can go and pretty reliably hear Spanish. But even someone from a Spanish speaking country, 90% of the time they're not going to be hearing any Spanish, and that can be rough. And so if you go up to them and talk to them in their foreign in their native tongue, like, that is an amazing thing. So another reason why you should learn another language is kind of more of a philosophical one. There's an old saying that I think it was Charlemagne who said it, that having a second tongue is having a second soul. And there are other sayings that say, like, to know the language of a culture is to know the soul of that culture. And there's this connection in, like, Western philosophy, I guess, between a culture and its language. And learning another language can increase your sensitivity to other cultures that are not your own. And that's a huge problem in the United States. I mean, like I said, it's May 2020, and right now in the United States, there are riots happening in Minnesota because police officers killed a man wrongly. There's a lot of unrest in the country right now, and there are still, the echoes of 9/11 still resound through the country. People they don't trust foreign people that come from certain places. I mean, just in my life, I've heard, people kind of lump together groups of people that, because they don't understand those cultures at all. Like, there's a stereotype in the United States that gas stations are owned by Indian people or Middle Eastern people, but it's never anything that anybody, like, will go and talk to the people about. But I've had coworkers in the past that have said, that it's bad that all these people from different countries are owning the gas stations and stuff, but they don't understand about, like, is this person from India, or are they from Bangladesh or Pakistan? Those are very different places and different cultures. And, when I go into a place that has someone from a different country, if I go in there regularly, I try and kind of understand where they come from. And there's a lady who works at a gas station that I used to go to quite often, who, I would talk to her, and she speaks like 8 languages, because she's from India, and India is a very linguistically diverse country. And so I would almost say, if you feel like you are uncomfortable with people that come from a certain part of the world, whether that be the Middle East or China or Korea, try learning a bit of their language, and you will gain an understanding and a sensitivity toward that culture. And it's nothing overt. Learning French didn't give me some keen insight into what it means to be French or anything like that. But I think really it comes from, the aspect of the language where you're interacting with people in that culture, whether it be, in face-to-face conversation, or, over Skype, or just vicariously through consuming media in that language. Your cultural sensitivity toward that people who exist within that culture and language will increase as you know that language. And so I think that in reality, learning another language is really important for everybody moving forward in the world as globalization increases, we don't necessarily want English to dominate every language and every culture. And I think that one of the negative side effects of globalization is that some of the smaller cultures kind of get absorbed and they go away. And that's actually one of my passions in language learning is kind of lesser known or endangered languages. And there are a lot of endangered languages. I mean, any language on Papua New Guinea is in danger of dying out. But one of my favorite languages to learn is Irish, and Irish is a critically endangered language, though it's coming back. There's a lot of momentum with keeping Irish alive. But as I learned Irish, I dabbled in it for 9 months or so. As I learned Irish, one thing that I thought about was like, I think it's important for people to learn endangered languages like Irish and Manx and Welsh and smaller languages from around the world. There's so many. I can't even make a list of languages that are endangered. But when you learn a language, even a little bit, it validates the existence of that language. And if you get into a smaller language like Irish, you'll hear a lot of people saying it's a waste of time to learn Irish because it's a small language. Not very many people speak it, and it's not even a real language or whatever, which is just a bunch of BS. But I think it is important because the more people that learn that language, the longer that language can exist. And it gives validation to the existence of that language and that culture. So if you are interested in learning a smaller language, say you go and learn, Manx, you stand by that and you tell yourself that this is an important thing that you're doing. You're helping that language to proliferate. And even if you learned a language where you were the only person learning it, kudos to you because you are keeping that language alive for at least the time that you're alive. And that is really important. It's very sad when languages die out. Especially some of the ones that are not in first world countries. A lot of the languages in Africa and things like that. When they die, we just lose them because there's no documentation of what those languages sounded like, and they're not written languages. So I think it's one of my personal passions is learning about languages that are obscure or small, because I feel like by learning about them myself, I personally validate their existence. I don't want English to just dominate everything. I don't want Chinese to dominate everything. I don't want French. I don't want any language to dominate the world and just snuff out all the small little unique cultures. Go and do some research about Basque. It's an amazing language, and it's a language isolate, so it's not related to any other language around it. But it's hanging on, and so I'm getting off on a tangent now, but learning another language makes you more sensitive to cultures and makes you a better person. It makes you a better citizen of the world. It removes the kind of egocentrism that's common, at least here in the United States. If you go and learn another language and learn about that it can express all the complexity of human existence, just like English can. Well, that takes you down a peg. Like, maybe the way Americans do things isn't always the best. And maybe the way that other people do things is valid too. And that's something that it would be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of Americans, but I think it's really important. So I guess the last thing that I want to talk about in this episode is, what is it like to learn a language? It seems when you're starting out to be just this monumental Herculean task. Especially if you took language classes in high school or in college, it can seem like just a completely daunting task, and a task that's just going to be full of memorization and grinding through verb conjugations and spelling, weird spelling and all that. But it doesn't have to be like that. The thing is, the way that we teach languages in America in school is not great, and it gives people this bad habit of expecting perfection out of themselves, because in school, when we make mistakes in language classes, we are punished with a bad grade, and that's not the way it needs to be. I love when I make mistakes in my languages, because those are the times when I learn the most about what's going on in the language. If you speak the language perfectly from day one, well, then you're already speaking the language, and that's not going to happen. But if you never make mistakes, or if you never let yourself make mistakes, then you never learn about what things you're saying incorrectly. So there are so many fun ways to learn a language nowadays, between apps like Duolingo and Memrise and Drops, to, you can watch movies and YouTube in different languages, and there's just so many resources that are not, opening up a grammar book and grinding through it. So, I use language learning apps. I use Duolingo. I use Memrise. I use Drops. I also, for French, I do a lot of reading books in French, which is still very slow, but really, the more that I learn languages, the more that I realize that it's not really about how you do it. It's just that you do it and you keep doing it. The difficult thing about learning a language is that it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take effort. Anything that you see online where they're like, I learned Spanish in 7 days. No, you didn't. Learning a language takes dedication, it takes self-motivation, and it takes time more than anything. I have been studying French for 6 or 7 years now, and there's still so much French that I don't know. I mean, heck, I have been speaking English since I could speak, and there's still so much English I don't know. Think about how many mistakes you make in English every day when you're talking or when you're writing. You're not speaking your native tongue perfectly, so don't expect yourself to speak a foreign language perfectly. It's important to make your language learning fun, because unless you're in a situation where you have to learn a language for work or something, you've got nothing obligating you to do it. You could stop. So it's important to make it fun. And so, there are language learning apps to help with that. There are, books. I mean, Harry Potter is translated into like 75 different languages. So, you can get content that you are interested in. You don't have to open a grammar book at all, really. I mean, I think that grammar is really important, and it's important to be able to speak your language well. But, I didn't open a French grammar book. I mean, I actually don't have any French grammar books. But, I'm at a level in French now where it would be a good idea for me to get a French grammar book to kind of, nail down some of the common mistakes that I make. But, so I guess in conclusion, if you're thinking about learning a language, totally do it. You'll never regret it. I've never met anybody who's like, well, I really wish that I hadn't learned French or Mandarin. If I could go back, I would just not. That's not how it is. And I don't think anybody really thinks that. Everybody knows, like, if they took the time to learn another language, it would be something that would enhance their life. It would create job opportunities. It would create opportunities for, cultural exchange. And so nobody, even here in the States, is under the opinion that learning a language is bad. I mean, there are probably some people who do, but they, have other issues. But, if you're feeling nervous or scared about it, just try it. Get Duolingo and do a couple lessons. Get Babbel, or listen to something about the language. There's a YouTube channel called Lang Focus with Paul, and he hugely motivates me to learn languages. I mean, I had no interest in learning Hungarian until I watched a video about Hungarian that he did, and now Hungarian is probably going to be my next language that I pick up. So, go and find content that interests you about the language, and just try it. See what happens. The worst thing that could happen is you hate it and you stop, and then you go back to the way that your life was. But if you do go through and you learn another language, like it'll change your life. It'll change the way you think about people. It'll change the way you think about the world. It'll change the way you think about just about everything, about food, about music, about, your place in the world. Like it changes everything, and in a positive way. I can't think of any negative consequences from having learned French. There just aren't any. It's a win-win for you. So go do it. So that's it. That's the end. If you've liked what you've heard, give my podcast a follow. Come and follow me on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook. Go to my blog. Let me know what you think. You can shoot me an email also at armchairlinguistblogger@gmail.com. And stay tuned here for more great content about all things language learning.